The humidity in Dallas during late September felt like a heavy, wet blanket draped over my shoulders, pressing the air out of my lungs with every step I took. My name is Margaret Miller. I am 68 years old, and my hands, once nimble and quick behind the deafening roar of the textile looms in Pennsylvania, are now mapped with deep lines and swollen joints that ache whenever the weather turns. On this particular Sunday, the sun was a white, blinding disk in the Texas sky, reflecting off the polished marble and pristine white brick of the Preston Hollow neighborhood. This was a place where lawns were manicured to the millimeter, and silence was a luxury bought with more money than I had earned in 40 years of labor. I was carrying a heavy ceramic dish, wrapped carefully in several layers of kitchen towels to keep the heat in. Inside was my signature southern fried chicken, the kind with the buttermilk crust that shattered like glass when you bit into it, accompanied by a side of cornbread made from a family recipe that had survived 3 generations. My daughter, Chloe, used to call it her comfort on a plate. When she was a little girl, before the world of high-end real estate and social climbing swallowed her whole, she would sit on the counter of our cramped kitchen in Scranton and watch me fry each piece with a look of pure adoration. Back then, we were a team. I was the mother who worked double shifts at the factory so she could have the best sneakers, the best prom dress, and eventually the best education. I reached the driveway of the massive 6-bedroom colonial house that stood like a monument to success. In the driveway sat a gleaming black Tesla and a luxury SUV, vehicles that cost more than the entire house I had raised Chloe in. I felt a twinge of pride, a ghost of a feeling that I had done my job well. I had helped her reach this pinnacle. But as I approached the heavy, dark oak front door, that pride was quickly replaced by a gnawing sense of anxiety. I smoothed my dress, a simple cotton floral piece that I had bought on sale at a local department store, and adjusted the heavy dish in my arms. I pressed the doorbell. The chimes echoed inside, a sophisticated melodic sound that seemed to mock the simplicity of my presence. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. I heard the sound of footsteps on the hardwood floors inside, the sharp click of expensive shoes. Then, the door swung open. It wasn't Chloe. It was Bradley, my son-in-law. He stood there in a tailored polo shirt and linen trousers, looking like he had just stepped off a yacht. His hair was perfectly gelled, and his eyes, usually cold and calculating, narrowed the moment they landed on me. He didn't say hello. He didn't offer to help with the heavy dish. Instead, he let out a loud, theatrical sigh that carried the weight of 1,000 insults. "Not her again," Bradley yelled, his voice booming into the quiet street, loud enough for the neighbors across the lawn to hear. His face twisted in a snarl of pure annoyance. "I told you, Margaret, Sundays are for us to decompress. We have a busy week ahead with the new listings, and we don't need you showing up like some uninvited solicitor." My breath caught in my throat. I felt the color drain from my face, the heat of the sidewalk rising through the soles of my sensible shoes. "Bradley, I just brought some chicken. I thought you and Chloe might want a home-cooked meal. I made the cornbread she likes." "We don't want your greasy chicken, Margaret," he snapped, his voice dripping with condescension. "We are on a clean eating protocol. Chloe is trying to maintain her image for the gala next week, and the last thing she needs is your heavy, old-fashioned cooking cluttering up our kitchen. You can't just keep appearing whenever you feel like it. You're invading our space." I looked past him, hoping to see Chloe. I saw her for a fleeting second, standing at the top of the grand staircase, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She looked down at me, our eyes meeting for a heartbeat. I expected her to come down, to defend me, to tell Bradley to stop. But she didn't move. She simply turned her head away, her expression blank and indifferent, as if she were watching a stranger being turned away at a restaurant. Bradley didn't wait for another word. He stepped back and gripped the handle of the oak door. "This isn't a soup kitchen, Margaret. Call before you come, though I suggest you wait until we invite you, which won't be today." The door slammed shut. The sound was deafening, a sharp crack that reverberated through my bones and seemed to split my heart into two. I stood there, frozen on the porch, holding the warm ceramic dish that now felt like a lead weight. The towels were starting to slip, and the smell of the buttermilk chicken, once so inviting, now felt like a cruel joke. I was a mother who had given everything, and I was being turned away like garbage on the sidewalk. I turned around slowly, my legs feeling like they were made of water. I walked down the long paved driveway, past the luxury cars, past the perfectly trimmed hedges, and headed toward the main road. I didn't have a car anymore. I had sold my reliable old sedan a year ago to help cover the closing costs on this very house. I had to walk 4 long blocks to the nearest bus stop. As I walked, the Texas sky, which had been so bright moments ago, began to bruise with dark, heavy clouds. A sudden thunderstorm, typical for Dallas in the afternoon, began to break. Within minutes, the rain was coming down in sheets. I didn't have an umbrella. I held the chicken dish against my chest, trying to protect it, even though I knew it was useless. By the time I reached the bus stop, I was soaked to the bone. My thin cotton dress clung to my shivering frame, and my hair was plastered to my forehead. I sat on the cold metal bench, the rain splashing against my feet. I looked down at the dish in my lap. The towels were damp, and the steam had long since vanished. I felt a sob rise in my chest, a deep, primal sound that I had to bite back. I thought about the house I had sold back in Scranton. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. It was a sturdy 3-bedroom craftsman that my late husband Henry and I had bought in 1984. We had spent 30 years there, marking Chloe's height on the kitchen doorframe, hosting Thanksgiving dinners, and tending to the small garden in the back. It was my safety net, my heritage. 3 years ago, when Chloe and Bradley decided to move to Texas, they came to me with tears in their eyes. Bradley talked about the booming market in Dallas, about how they could build a legacy if they just had the capital to get started. They needed $300,000 for the down payment on a home in the right neighborhood. They told me that if I sold my house and moved with them, I would never have to worry again. They promised me a guest suite. They promised me I would be the center of their lives, that I would finally be able to rest after decades of working in the factory. I believed them. I wanted to be near my daughter. I wanted to see her succeed. I sold the house, I sold the memories, and I handed over every penny of the $300,000 to them. I kept nothing for myself, thinking that my daughter's love was the only insurance I needed. I moved into a small, 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that Bradley described as up and coming, but in reality, it was noisy and neglected. The rent was $4,000 a month, which took almost every cent of my Social Security and the small pension I had earned. For 3 years, I had lived on the margins, clipping coupons, skipping meals, and making my clothes last longer than they should, all so I could be near Chloe. The bus finally arrived, its tires splashing through the puddles. I climbed the steps, the driver looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance as I dripped water onto the floor. I found a seat at the back and sat in silence, the hum of the engine vibrating through the seat. I felt small. I felt invisible. I realized that to Chloe and Bradley, I wasn't a mother or a benefactor. I was an obstacle. I was a reminder of a past they wanted to forget, a woman with calloused hands and a Scranton accent that didn't fit into the high society life they were trying to build. When I finally reached my apartment, I was shivering uncontrollably. The small space felt colder than usual. I walked to the kitchen and placed the chicken dish on the counter. I unwrapped it, the towels heavy and cold. I looked at the food I had spent hours preparing. It was ruined, the crust soggy and grey from the humidity. I didn't even have the energy to put it in the refrigerator. I walked to the trash can and scraped the entire meal into the bin. The sound of the chicken hitting the plastic liner was the finality of my Sunday. I sat on my old, worn sofa, the one piece of furniture I had managed to keep from my old life. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark, listening to the rain hammer against the window pane. I thought about Chloe. I remembered her graduation day, how she had hugged me and told me she couldn't have done it without me. I remembered her wedding day, how I had helped her into her dress, my fingers trembling as I fastened the buttons. Where was that girl? How could she stand at the top of those stairs and watch her husband treat me like a stray dog? The silence in the apartment was deafening. It was the silence of a woman who had given away her kingdom and was now a beggar at the gates. I realized then that I had been gaslighting myself for years, making excuses for their distance, telling myself they were just busy, that the pressure of Dallas society was a lot for them. But the truth was simpler and much more painful. They didn't love me. They loved the $300,000 I had provided. And now that the money was gone, now that the house was bought and the cars were in the driveway, I was no longer an asset. I was a liability. I looked at my hands in the dim light. They were the hands of a worker. They had survived 40 years of textile dust, needle pricks, and the grinding rhythm of the machines. They had provided a life for a daughter who now found them embarrassing. A deep, cold anger began to stir in the pit of my stomach, a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't the hot, impulsive anger of youth, but the slow, burning resentment of a woman who had been pushed too far. I didn't know then that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one forming inside me. I didn't know that within a few days, the phone would ring, and Chloe would ask for more, oblivious to the fact that the well had finally run dry. All I knew, as I sat in the darkness of my $4,000 a month apartment, was that the Margaret Miller who always said yes, the Margaret Miller who lived for her daughter's approval, had died on that porch in Preston Hollow. I spent the next 2 days in a state of quiet, focused reflection. I didn't go out. I didn't call Chloe to apologize for invading her space, as I might have done in the past. I simply existed in the silence of my home, nursing a cold I had caught from the rain, and thinking about every time I had been pushed aside over the last 3 years. I remembered the holidays where I was asked to stay in the guest room while their important friends were over. I remembered the times Bradley had laughed at my Scranton accent in front of his colleagues. I remembered the feeling of my dignity being eroded, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a shadow. But the most painful memory was the day I signed the papers. I had been so happy, so convinced that I was doing the right thing. I saw the look on Bradley's face, not of gratitude, but of triumph. He knew he had me. He knew I was giving up my only leverage, my only security. He had played me like a professional, and I had been a willing participant in my own downfall. I looked at my bank balance on my laptop. It was a bleak sight. After paying the rent and the utilities, I had exactly $400 left for the month, $400 to cover food, my blood pressure medication, and transportation. It was a joke. I was a woman who had once owned a home outright, a woman who had never owed a penny to anyone. And now I was living paycheck to paycheck in a city that didn't want me. On Tuesday morning, the phone rang. I saw Chloe's name on the caller ID. My heart skipped a beat, a reflexive response that I hated. I let it ring. It rang again and again. Finally, on the fourth attempt, I picked it up. Mum? Chloe's voice came through, sounding strained and high-pitched. She was using her little girl voice, the one she used when she wanted something. Mum, are you there? Yes, Chloe. I'm here, I said, my voice flat and devoid of the usual warmth. Oh, thank God. Listen, I'm so sorry about Sunday. Bradley was just stressed. You know how the real estate market is right now? It's so volatile. He didn't mean to be harsh. He just needs his quiet time on Sundays to prepare for the week. You understand, right? I didn't say anything. I listened to the silence on the other end, the way she waited for me to reassure her, to tell her it was okay, to forgive them like I always did. Mum, are you still there? She asked, her voice tinged with impatience. I'm here, Chloe. Good. Look, I'm calling because we're in a bit of a bind. Bradley found this incredible investment opportunity, a block of luxury townhomes in North Dallas. It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance to really scale the business. But we're a little short on the liquidity for the initial deposit. We need $50,000 by Friday to secure the contract. I felt a cold, sharp laugh bubble up in my throat, but I suppressed it. $50,000, Chloe. I don't have $50,000. You know that. I gave you everything I had for the down payment on your house. Oh, Mum, come on. We know you have those savings bonds from the factory. And your retirement fund. You've always been so good at saving. We just need a short-term loan. 6 months, maybe 8 at the most. We'll pay you back with interest, I promise. It's for our future, Mum. For the family legacy. Family legacy, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Chloe, I have $400 in my checking account. My retirement fund was liquidated to cover the closing costs on your mansion. I have nothing left to give. There was a long pause on the other end. The sweet, little girl voice vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, sharp tone that I recognized from Bradley. Well, Margaret, that's disappointing. We really counted on you. Bradley said you might be difficult about this. He said you've become very selfish lately, always dwelling on the past. Selfish? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Chloe, I sold my home. I moved across the country. I gave you $300,000. I live in a tiny apartment while you live in a palace. How am I the selfish one? Ugh, here we go again with the Scranton house. Chloe groaned. You always bring that up. You gave us that money as a gift, Mum. A gift for your daughter's happiness. You can't just keep using it as a weapon against us. If you won't help us now, then I don't know what to say. We're trying to build something here, and you're just being a weight around our necks. A weight around your necks, I said, the clarity of the situation finally hitting me with full force. Yes, Chloe snapped. You're always around, always hovering, always expecting us to entertain you. Bradley is right. You don't fit in here, Margaret. You should have stayed in Pennsylvania with your factory friends if you wanted to live in the past. If you can't help us with the 50,000, then don't bother coming over this Sunday, or any Sunday, or we need to focus on our business, and we don't have time for your drama. She hung up. The dial tone hummed in my ear, a monotonous, mechanical sound that seemed to signal the end of my life as I knew it. I slowly put the phone down on the table. My hands weren't trembling anymore. They were steady. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't just Bradley's cruelty or Chloe's indifference. It was the total lack of humanity. They had looked at me and seen a bank account, not a mother. They had taken my life's work and discarded the shell. Chloe's words, a weight around our necks, echoed in my mind, a bitter refrain that solidified my resolve. I stood up and walked to the window. The Dallas skyline was visible in the distance, a collection of glass and steel towers that felt cold and unreachable. I looked down at the street below, at the people rushing about their lives, oblivious to the quiet tragedy in apartment 4B. I realized that for 3 years I had been a ghost, haunting their lives, waiting for a scrap of affection that was never coming. But ghosts can be powerful, and sometimes they can reclaim the things that were taken from them. I walked to my small desk and pulled out a manila folder I had kept hidden at the bottom of a drawer. Inside were the legal documents from the house transfer, the papers I had signed 3 years ago in a blur of emotion and trust. I sat down and began to read them, not with the eyes of a loving mother, but with the cold, precise focus of the woman who had managed the logistics of a textile floor for 20 years. I knew there was something Bradley had missed. He was arrogant, and arrogant men always overlook the details when they think they are dealing with someone they consider inferior. I turned to the final page of the agreement, the one titled Exhibit C. It was a secondary document, a rider that Arthur Vance, my old family lawyer from Scranton, had insisted on including. At the time, Bradley had rolled his eyes and called it a formality, a piece of old-fashioned legal clutter. Chloe had urged me to just sign it so we could get the deal done. I read the clause again, my heart beginning to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm. The property transfer was contingent on a right of habitation and a non-disparagement clause. If the grantor, that was me, was ever denied access to the property or subjected to documented emotional or financial abuse by the grantees, the transfer could be rendered null and void, with the full value of the initial gift becoming a secured lien against the property, payable immediately. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Arthur Vance, you brilliant old man, I whispered. He had seen it coming. He had known Bradley's type. He had protected me when I was too blinded by love to protect myself. I looked at the phone. I didn't call Chloe. I didn't call Bradley. Instead, I dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. A number in the 570 area code. Arthur, I said when the voice answered on the other end. This is Margaret Miller. I'm in Dallas, and I need your help. As I spoke to Arthur, the pain in my chest began to subside, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The transition was starting. The person who had been a weight around their necks was about to become the anchor that pulled their entire world under. The Sunday chicken was gone, the soggy crust and grey meat sitting in the trash, but a much more potent dish was being prepared. The humiliation, the rain, the slamming door, it was all fuel now. I realized that my psychological pain wasn't a weakness. It was a map. It showed me exactly where they were vulnerable. They cared about image. They cared about Preston Hollow. They cared about the gala and the listings. And most of all, they cared about the mansion that my $300,000 had built. I looked at the calendar. Friday. The day they needed the $50,000. The day their contract for the new investment would either be secured or lost. I smiled, a slow, deliberate movement of my lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but of anticipation. The first part of my life was over. The part where I worked and sacrificed and loved unconditionally. The second part, the part where I demanded justice, was just beginning. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, the steam rising in the quiet apartment. I felt a strange sense of peace. I was no longer a ghost. I was a storm, and I was heading straight for Preston Hollow. The dial tone was a cold, sharp blade that sliced through the lingering echoes of Chloe's voice, leaving me standing in a kitchen that felt suddenly too large and too empty. I held the receiver for a long time, the plastic warming against my palm, before I finally set it back in its cradle. The silence that followed was different from the silence I had lived in for the past 3 years. It wasn't the silence of waiting or the silence of longing. It was the silence of a grave, the grave of my maternal hope. For years, I had watered that hope with my own sweat and tears, believing that if I just gave enough, if I just loved enough, the daughter I had raised in the shadow of the Scranton Mills would return to me. But the woman on the other end of that line, the woman who had called her own mother a weight around her neck, was a stranger crafted in Bradley's image. I walked to my small bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, my gaze falling on a framed photograph on the nightstand. It was a picture of Chloe at 7 years old, her face smudged with dirt from playing in the yard, holding a dandelion as if it were a prize from a king. I remembered the way her laughter used to ring out, a sound so bright it could pierce the gloom of the winter months. I looked at that little girl and felt a profound sense of mourning. She was gone, replaced by a mannequin draped in designer labels and hollow ambitions. The psychological weight of that realization was staggering, a physical pressure behind my eyes that made the room tilt. I had lost my daughter not to death, but to greed, and that was a far more agonizing bereavement. I reached for the manila folder again, my fingers tracing the edges of the Exhibit C rider that Arthur Vance had tucked away like a hidden weapon. Arthur had been more than just our lawyer. He had been Henry's best friend, a man who had seen the grit of the working class and the rot of the opportunistic. When I had called him, his voice had been like a steady hand reaching out from the past. He didn't ask many questions at first. He simply listened as I described the slamming door, the rain, and the $50,000 Chloe had demanded. He told me he would be in Dallas by the following morning. He told me to stay quiet, to observe, and to say nothing that could alert Bradley to the shift in the atmosphere. That night, sleep remained elusive. I lay in the dark, my mind churning with memories of the factory floor. I thought about the thousands of yards of fabric I had inspected, looking for the smallest flaw, the tiniest thread that was out of place. I had been an expert at finding the rot in a beautiful weave. Now, I realized I had to apply that same scrutiny to the life Chloe and Bradley had built. Every luxury they flaunted, every polished surface in that Preston Hollow mansion, was a thread I needed to pull. Arthur arrived at my apartment just after 10 on Wednesday morning. He looked older, his hair a shock of white, and his suit a bit more wrinkled than I remembered, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He sat at my small kitchen table and spread out a collection of documents he had pulled from his briefcase. He spent the next 2 hours explaining the legal landscape to me. He told me that the $300,000 I had given them wasn't legally a simple gift in the eyes of the rider he had drafted. It was a conditional advancement of inheritance, tied strictly to my well-being and my right to a respectful environment within the family structure. The non-disparagement clause was the key, Arthur whispered, tapping a finger on a highlighted paragraph. Bradley thought he was being clever, Margaret. He thought he could treat you like a servant because you're a widow with no one left. But by calling you a solicitor on a public street, by belittling you in front of his peers, and by Chloe essentially barring you from the home you funded, they have triggered a breach of contract so severe it borders on fraud. But I need proof, Arthur, I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. I need to show that this wasn't just a one-time argument. I need to show the pattern of abuse. Arthur leaned forward, his expression solemn. That's where the silent vigil begins, Margaret. You have to go back, not as a mother looking for love, but as an auditor. You need to document every insult, every exclusion. And more importantly, we need to look into Bradley's books, a man who demands $50,000 on a Tuesday morning from a woman he knows is broke, isn't a successful businessman. He's a drowning man looking for a life vest. The thought of going back to that house made my stomach churn, but the anger that had taken root on Sunday provided the necessary steel. I decided to use the empty ceramic dish as my excuse. On Thursday afternoon, I dressed in my best beige suit, pinned my hair back neatly, and took the bus back to Preston Hollow. I didn't press the doorbell this time. I walked to the side of the house, where I knew the gardener left a spare key in a decorative stone. My heart hammered against my ribs as I let myself in through the mudroom. The house was silent, but it felt heavy with the scent of expensive candles and a cold, sterile cleanliness. I placed the dish on the granite island in the kitchen and stood there for a moment, absorbing the stillness. Then I began to move. I didn't go into their bedroom. My sense of decency wouldn't allow it. Instead, I went to Bradley's home office, a mahogany-panelled room that smelled of cigars and leather. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun, just a thread to pull. I found it in the trash can next to his desk. It was a crumpled notice from a high-end luxury car dealership, a final demand for payment on the black Tesla I had seen in the driveway. The amount overdue was staggering, over $15,000. I smoothed the paper out and took a photo of it with my phone, my hands steady. Beneath it was a pile of credit card statements, all with balances that made my head spin. Bradley wasn't just short on liquidity. He was underwater, drowning in a sea of high-interest debt that he was trying to outrun with my $300,000. I heard the sound of the garage door opening and quickly moved back to the kitchen, leaning against the counter just as Chloe walked in. She was carrying a stack of mail and a yoga mat, her face tight with a familiar irritation. She stopped dead when she saw me, her eyes flaring with anger. "Mum, what the hell are you doing here?" "I told you we didn't want you over this week," she snapped, throwing her mail onto the counter. Her voice was sharp, a weapon she used with practiced ease. "I just came to return the dish, Chloe," I said softly, playing the role of the submissive, apologetic mother. "I didn't want to leave it on the porch. I thought I might catch you for a minute. I'm sorry about the phone call. I was confused." Chloe sighed, the sound a mix of boredom and disdain. "Bradley was right. You're becoming so needy, Mum. It's embarrassing. We have a huge gala on Friday night, the North Dallas Real Estate Honors. Bradley is up for a major award, and the last thing we need is the distraction of your Scranton drama. We're trying to move in circles that you don't understand." I looked at her, truly looking at her, and saw the hollowness in her eyes. She was terrified. She was clinging to this facade of wealth and prestige, while the foundation was rotting beneath her feet. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her turning away from me at the top of the stairs. "A gala?" "That sounds wonderful, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice humble. "I'm sure you'll be the most beautiful woman there. I won't stay. I just wanted to tell you that I've been thinking about the money. I might be able to find a way to help you with that $50,000. Chloe's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The anger vanished, replaced by a hungry, predatory gleam. "Really, Mum, that would be amazing. I knew you'd come through for us." Bradley was so worried. "It's just a short-term thing, I promise. Once this investment clears, we'll be set for life." I smiled, a small, sad movement. "I'll see what I can do, Chloe. I'll let you know on Friday morning. I just need to check with my bank back in Scranton." As I walked out of the mudroom, I heard her already on the phone, her voice excited and high-pitched. "Bradley! She's going to do it. The old bird is coming through." The walk back to the bus stop didn't feel as long this time. I felt a cold, clinical detachment from the pain. I spent the rest of Thursday and Friday morning in a hotel room with Arthur Vance. We went through the evidence I had gathered, the car payment notice, the credit card statements, and a recording I had made of my conversation with Chloe on my phone. "It's enough to file for the lien, Margaret," Arthur said, his face illuminated by the blue light of his laptop. "But we want more than just a lien. We want the full rescission of the property transfer. For that, we need to show that Bradley has committed actual fraud, not just financial mismanagement." We found what we needed on Friday morning. Arthur had been working with a private investigator who had been digging into Bradley's real estate listings. It turned out that the luxury townhomes Bradley was trying to secure with the $50,000 didn't exist. He had created a shell company, used photos from a project in Atlanta, and was trying to solicit investors in Dallas to pay off his existing debts. It was a classic Ponzi scheme on a suburban scale, and Chloe was the one signing the promotional materials, her name lending a veneer of legitimacy to his lies. My own daughter was becoming a criminal, a pawn in Bradley's desperate game. The psychological toll of that discovery was a physical ache in my chest, a feeling of failure that no amount of logic could soothe. I had worked 40 years to give her a better life, and she was throwing it all away for a lifestyle she couldn't afford, and a man who didn't respect her. I sat in the hotel room, looking at the Dallas skyline, and felt a profound sense of isolation. I was a woman alone, caught between the love for a daughter who had betrayed me and the necessity of a justice that would destroy her world. But I realized that by protecting her, I was only enabling her destruction. If I gave them the $50,000, it wouldn't save them. It would only prolong the agony and make the eventual collapse even more catastrophic. I had to be the one to stop the bleeding, even if it meant cutting deep. The gala was scheduled for 7 o'clock on Friday night at a luxury hotel downtown. Bradley had spent thousands of dollars on a VIP table, money he didn't have, to impress people who didn't care about him. Chloe had bought a dress that cost more than $2,000, a final act of defiance against a reality that was closing in on them. I called Chloe at noon on Friday. I told her I was still working on the transfer, that the bank in Scranton was being difficult because of the size of the amount. I told her I would meet her at the gala with the confirmation papers. I could hear the relief in her voice, a sound that made me feel like a traitor. But the betrayal had started with them. Arthur had everything ready: the legal notice, the lien documents, and a letter of intent that would be served to Bradley in front of his peers. We weren't just going to take back the money, we were going to expose the rot. The goal wasn't just financial recovery, it was the restoration of dignity through the public admission of truth. I spent the afternoon preparing. I didn't wear the cotton floral dress this time. I went to a high-end boutique and bought a simple, elegant black sheath dress and a single strand of pearls. I had my hair done in a sophisticated bun. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the factory worker from Scranton. I saw Margaret Miller, a woman of substance, a woman who had earned every line on her face and every cent in her name. As the sun began to set over Dallas, casting long golden shadows across the skyscrapers, I felt a strange sense of calm. The doubt that had plagued me for 3 years, the feeling that I was the problem, the weight, the embarrassing mother, was gone. I was the one holding the cards now. I was the one who had funded their fantasy, and I was the one who was going to bring them back to earth. I met Arthur in the lobby of the hotel at 6:45. He looked at me and nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. "You look like a woman who knows exactly what she's doing, Margaret," he said, handing me a small, elegant evening bag. "I do, Arthur," I said, my voice as steady as the machines I used to run. "I'm just taking back what belongs to me." We walked into the ballroom, a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, the air thick with the smell of perfume and ambition. I saw them almost immediately, standing near the center of the room. Bradley was laughing with a group of men, his chest puffed out like a peacock. Chloe was next to him, her face a mask of practiced charm, holding a glass of champagne as if it were a scepter. They looked perfect. They looked successful. They looked like they had everything. But I knew the truth. I knew the overdue car payments, the maxed-out credit cards, and the non-existent townhomes. I knew the coldness behind Bradley's smile and the fear behind Chloe's laughter. They were a house of cards, and I was the wind. I didn't approach them immediately. I watched from the sidelines, absorbing the atmosphere of entitlement and deceit. I saw Bradley receive a nod of acknowledgement from a prominent developer, a moment of validation that he had been craving for years. I saw Chloe whisper something in his ear, her face alight with the hope of the $50,000 that was supposed to save them. The internal conflict I had felt, the hesitation to hurt my own child, was still there, a dull ache in the background. But it was overshadowed by the memory of the rain, the slamming door, and the word solicitor. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing this for the memory of Henry, for the years of labor in the Scranton mills, and for the preservation of a dignity that they had tried to strip away. I walked toward their table, Arthur following a few steps behind. Chloe saw me first, her eyes widening with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Bradley turned, his face tightening for a split second before he smoothed it over with a practiced, oily smile. "Margaret, you made it," Bradley said, his voice loud enough for the people at the neighboring table to hear. He was playing the role of the devoted son-in-law. "We were beginning to think you'd gotten lost. Did you bring the documents we discussed?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a single white envelope. "I did, Bradley. I have everything right here." Chloe reached for the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. "Oh, Mum, thank you. You have no idea what this means to us." I pulled the envelope back, just out of her reach. "I think you should read it first," I said, my voice quiet but carrying a weight that silenced the table. "It's not exactly what you're expecting." Bradley's smile faltered. "Margaret, what is this? We have people here. This isn't the time for games." "It's not a game, Bradley," I said, handing the envelope to Chloe. "It's a reality check." Chloe opened the envelope, her brow furrowed in confusion. As her eyes scanned the first page, the color began to drain from her face. Her hands started to shake, the champagne glass in her other hand tilting precariously. Bradley snatched the paper from her, his eyes darting across the text. "A lien?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "A rescission of the property transfer?" "Margaret, what the hell is this? Are you insane?" Arthur Vance stepped forward, his presence a calm, legal wall. "No, Bradley. It's a consequence. My name is Arthur Vance. I'm Margaret's attorney. We have filed a formal lien against the Preston Hollow property based on the breach of the non-disparagement and habitation rider. Furthermore, we are initiating a full investigation into the shell company you've been using to solicit investments for the North Dallas townhome project." The people at the neighboring table began to turn their heads, the murmurs of the ballroom fading as the drama unfolded. Bradley's face turned a deep, angry purple. "You can't do this," he snarled, stepping toward Arthur. "This is my house. I'm a respected businessman in this city." "Actually, Bradley," Arthur said, his voice cool and professional, "the house was funded by Margaret's gift, a gift that was conditional on her well-being. By excluding her from the home and disparaging her publicly, you have rendered that transfer voidable. And as for your business reputation, I think the authorities will have a different opinion once they see the evidence of your solicitations for a non-existent project." Chloe looked at me, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. "Mum, how could you do this to us, at our gala? You're destroying everything." I looked her in the eye, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel the need to apologize. No, Chloe, I'm not destroying anything. I'm just showing everyone that there was nothing there to begin with. You destroyed this a long time ago. You destroyed it every time you chose Bradley's greed over your mother's dignity. You destroyed it when you let him slam that door in my face while it was raining. The silence at the table was total. The prominent developer Bradley had been trying to impress stood up and walked away, his face a mask of polite disgust. The other guests began to whisper, their eyes moving from Bradley's red face to Chloe's trembling frame. The facade was gone. The mannequin was broken. Bradley looked around the room, realizing that his audience was watching his downfall. He turned back to me, his eyes filled with a pure, cold hatred. "You'll regret this, Margaret. You'll be alone in that pathetic little apartment with nothing. We were your only family." I looked at him and felt a sudden, profound sense of freedom. "No, Bradley. I was alone when I was with you. I was alone when I was waiting for a scrap of love that never came. In that apartment, I have my dignity, and in this ballroom, I have the truth." I turned and walked away, Arthur Vance by my side. I didn't look back at the table. I didn't look back at the daughter I had lost. I walked through the ballroom, past the tuxedos and the pearls, and out into the cool Dallas night. The transition was complete. The weight was gone. I was no longer a solicitor, a guest, or an embarrassment. I was Margaret Miller, and I was going home. The morning after the gala, the Dallas sun rose with a sharp, unforgiving brilliance that seemed to expose every crack in the city's glass facade. I woke up in my small apartment, but for the first time in years, the walls didn't feel like they were closing in on me. The air was cool. The hum of the city outside felt like a distant rhythm rather than a chaotic noise, and the weight that had anchored me to the floor was gone. I spent the early hours in the company of Arthur Vance, who was already coordinating with a team of forensic accountants and a specialized unit within the Dallas Police Department. Bradley's house of cards wasn't just wobbling, it was being dismantled by the very laws he had tried to manipulate. By 10 o'clock, the news began to circulate through the elite real estate circles of North Dallas. The North Dallas Townhome Project, the centerpiece of Bradley's professional identity, was officially flagged as a fraudulent solicitation. The $50,000 he had so desperately tried to squeeze out of me was intended to pay off a high-interest bridge loan from a group of private lenders who were starting to lose their patience. Bradley hadn't just been reckless, he had been criminal. He had used the prestige of Preston Hollow and the social standing of my daughter to lure in investors, promising them returns that were impossible to achieve. I sat with Arthur as he received the call from the district attorney's office. They were moving to freeze all assets associated with Thompson Realty Group, including the bank accounts Bradley used to fund their lavish lifestyle. The black Tesla, the designer clothes, and even the high-end catering for the gala, it was all being scrutinized as part of a larger pattern of financial misconduct. But the most important piece of the puzzle remained the house. The mansion that stood as a testament to my sacrifice was now the primary target of our legal rescission. I arrived at the Preston Hollow estate at 2 o'clock that afternoon. This time, I didn't come with chicken or apologies. I came with a police escort and a court-certified order of immediate possession. The neighborhood was quiet, the large oak trees casting long shadows over the emerald green lawns. As the cruiser pulled into the driveway, I saw the black Tesla parked haphazardly near the garage. The house, once so imposing and untouchable, looked vulnerable. It looked like what it truly was, a hollow monument built on the back of an aging woman's life savings. We walked up to the front door. Bradley opened it before we could even ring the bell. He looked like a ghost of the man I had seen the night before. His shirt was rumpled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked at the police officers, then at me, and I saw the realization of his total defeat settle into his features. "You can't do this," Bradley whispered, his voice cracking. "This is my property. You gave us that money." "No, Bradley," Arthur Vance said, stepping forward with the paperwork. "The transfer was conditional. You breached the terms of the habitation and disparagement rider, and given the evidence of fraud currently being processed by the state, the court has granted Mrs. Miller an emergency order of rescission. This house is no longer yours. You have 2 hours to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises." I walked past him into the foyer. The marble floor felt cool beneath my feet. I saw Chloe sitting on the grand staircase, her head in her hands. She was still wearing the jewelry from the night before, a glittering contrast to the despair on her face. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Mom, please," Chloe sobbed, her voice sounding small and childlike. "We have nowhere to go." They froze everything. "The bank told us we can't even access the checking account." Bradley said it's just a misunderstanding, that he can fix it. "Bradley can't fix anything, Chloe," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the anger that had fueled me for so long. "Bradley is a man who builds on sand, and you were the one who helped him dig the hole." I watched as the police officers followed Bradley into his office to ensure he didn't destroy any documents. Chloe stood up and walked toward me, her hands reaching out as if she wanted to touch me, but she stopped halfway. "Mum, I'm your daughter. You can't throw us out on the street. Think about what people will say. Think about our family." I looked at the daughter I had raised, the girl I had worked double shifts in Scranton to protect. "Chloe, you ceased to think about family the moment you let your husband call me a solicitor on a public street. You ceased to think about family when you watched him slam that door in my face while it was raining. You called me a weight around your neck. Well, the weight is gone now. You're free to swim on your own." The 2 hours passed in a blur of motion and noise. Bradley dragged suitcases down the stairs, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. He tried to argue with the officers, tried to call his lawyer, tried to claim that he was being targeted by a vengeful woman. But the facts were immovable. The car dealership had already sent a tow truck for the Tesla. The credit card companies were already filing their liens. The world he had built on $300,000 of my money was evaporating. As they stood by the front door, surrounded by their luggage, the house felt strangely quiet. Chloe looked at me one last time, a mix of resentment and fear in her eyes. "I hope you're happy, Margaret," she spat, the practicing charm finally gone, replaced by a bitter, ugly honesty. "You got what you wanted. You got the house. Are you going to live here all alone in this giant mausoleum?" I looked at her, and I felt a profound sense of peace. "I'm not going to live here at all, Chloe. I'm putting this house on the market tomorrow. The $300,000 will go back into my retirement fund, and the surplus will be donated to a charity that helps women who have been financially abused by their families. I'm going back to a place where people know my name and respect my hands. I'm going back to Scranton." I watched them walk down the driveway, carrying their bags like refugees from a war of their own making. They didn't have a car, and they didn't have a plan. They walked toward the main road, the same road I had walked in the rain just a few days prior. I felt a twinge of the old maternal instinct, a desire to call them back, to save them from the consequences of their own actions. But I remembered the factory machines. I remembered the rhythm of the loom. If you didn't fix the floor when it first appeared, the entire fabric would eventually unravel. I was finally letting the fabric unravel so they could learn how to weave something honest. I spent the final evening in the house, alone. I sat in the grand living room, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The house was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't a home. It was a transaction. I thought about Henry, about the Craftsman House in Scranton, and about the years we had spent together. I realized that my dignity wasn't tied to this marble or these high ceilings. It was tied to the truth. I called Arthur Vance and told him to finalize the listing. I told him I wanted to leave Dallas within 48 hours. I didn't want any more of this city's air or its polished lies. I wanted to be around people who understood the value of a dollar and the sanctity of a promise. The legal proceedings would take months, perhaps years. Bradley would likely face prison time for his investment schemes, and Chloe would have to navigate the fallout of her complicity. But that was their journey to take. I had done my part. I had been the mother who gave, and I had been the woman who took back. I had survived the factory, the widowhood, and the betrayal. As I walked out of the house for the final time, I paused at the threshold. I looked at the heavy oak door, the one Bradley had slammed in my mat. I reached out and touched the wood, feeling its grain beneath my fingers. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't even feel revenge anymore. I simply felt the cool, steadying touch of justice. I pulled the door shut behind me, the click of the lock sounding like a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. I walked down the driveway toward the waiting taxi. The air was warm, and the Dallas skyline was beginning to twinkle in the distance. I looked up at the stars and thought about the girl with the dandelion in the Scranton yard. I realized that I couldn't save that girl, but I had finally saved the woman she had become, the woman who had forgotten her own worth. I climbed into the taxi and told the driver to take me to the airport. I was going home, not to a mansion, but to a life that was finally, truly mine. Revenge is not meant to satisfy a thirst for hatred, but to force the light of truth upon those who preferred the dark. Justice exists to restore dignity, not to destroy, for even in the wreckage of betrayal, one's value remains unshaken. Family ties are no shield for cruelty, and kinship cannot be used to justify the unpardonable. The most vital forgiveness is the one we grant ourselves, pardoning the heart for its capacity to love and its willingness to believe. True rebirth is found in the quiet strength of the soul, choosing to remain human even after the deepest wounds have been inflicted. We move forward not with the weight of resentment, but with the quiet dignity of a life reclaimed and a spirit finally free.